Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. I'm your host, Dave Markel, coming to you from the Long Valley Studio in Washington, Utah. I'm glad you've joined me this week. This is episode 124, and my guest this week is a counselor, wife, author, and survivor of domestic violence, rape, and sexual assault. Her name is Gabriel, and she's written a book called No Ordinary Love. It's written from a particularly unique perspective about three women, each dealing with their own unique domestic violence challenges, but sharing in the commonalities of interpersonal violence. Gabriel accepted my invitation to come on this show to talk about her assault-filled past and how writing her book was a crucial therapeutic element of her healing. I'm glad you're here because this podcast is dedicated to providing a safe space for victims and survivors of rape or sexual assault to share their experiences in order to help themselves and other listeners as they progress in their own growth and healing. In addition, this podcast offers a trauma-informed lens for inspiration, education, and guidance on healing from interpersonal violence trauma, centered on belief, support, and empathy. Stay with me through this episode with Bibi. It's an enthralling story you're going to want to hear. Here's Bibi. Gabriel, it is an honor, and I'm thrilled to have you with me today on Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. This is a long time coming. I'm glad you're finally here with me.
Yeah, me too. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you bet. Bibi, so that my audience has a background and some information on even how we met and who you are, can you tell my audience about yourself and talk about how we met, if you don't mind?
Sure. I am a survivor of multiple, unfortunately, sexual assaults as well as domestic violence. And over the last couple of decades, I've picked up and put down and picked up and put down writing a book, which as I was getting closer to, the book was done, but as I was getting closer to it being published, it was suggested to me that I should probably start an Instagram account and a bazillion others, but I chose Instagram to try to network and get a following and follow others. And I just want to say, first and foremost, I thought I think healing is lifelong. However, I thought I was just about healed as I could be. And when I created my Instagram account in June, I cannot tell you how much more healing I have done in that time, just from being in such a huge community of other survivors. And I have to say that has been life-changing for me. That is how you and I met. You reached out to me and I was shocked and scared and questioning all of my decisions about writing this book. Like, oh my goodness, if I can't talk to this really nice guy for his podcast, how can I possibly be publishing a book in the next couple of months? But you were very patient and persistent, not pushy at all. And I guess that was back in, well, it was before my surgery. Yeah, in October. And here we are now. So thank you.
Absolutely. Like I said, it's an honor to even have you here. Bibi, have you heard any of my episodes on the show?
Yes, I have.
So that probably had an influence too on whether or not you would be on the show. And I'm just wondering, for my audience's sake, what your impressions are about the stories that you're hearing on Sexual Assault Survivor Stories.
When I listen to them, I feel more seen and I feel more heard and I feel more of this is probably a weird way to describe it, but of a sense of belonging. If you remember when you first reached out to me, I was, well, could you send me a list of the questions you'll be asking me? Or is this supposed to be more natural? And you're like, no, it's supposed to be natural. But then I got in my head about that. My husband said to me, you know your story, you know your past. What are you worried about? That's when I started really listening to quite a few of yours and just hearing that you always say things like, if you're able to tell me a little bit about whatever, could you do that? You really do let the person lead. So I felt very safe and respected and supported in just listening to how you were with your other guests.
I'm glad you brought all that up because I want my audience to know that if they are thinking about reaching out to me to be a guest on this show, that's what this is about. It's a platform for victims and survivors, not only to have a platform to tell their story, but also to have that connection with other victims and survivors. And it's happened a lot. I've had a lot of my guests get in touch with each other It's quite the community. I love it. I love seeing and hearing about these guests that have made some connections and friendships because of this show. Part of your background is in mental health. Am I right?
Yes, so I'm a social worker. I work clinically, and the majority of my career has been school-based counseling, but I've dabbled a little bit in private practice. I'll be going back into that a little bit more coming up again. Did a couple different things at the beginning, including working for a sexual assault crisis line. Yes, I'm trained as a clinical social worker, master's level, registered. Yeah. But this is kind of different from that. I've never actually worked in domestic violence. It feels very different.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the book, and I'm going to throw this out there. The title is No Ordinary Love.
Yes.
And the way this book came about is fascinating. You sent me a synopsis of how it all came together, and there are probably many people in the audience who don't know about it. I've started reading it. I am just enthralled with it. It's like a edge of the seat kind of. It's like candy. I just want more. It's such a well written book.
Thank you.
And would it be okay if you told about how this book came about and how it is that you thought of this whole process?
Absolutely. When I was the first of two times that I was free from my abusive ex, I was still in high school, and I had a creative writing class, and I wrote this glorified breakup. It was totally baloney. It was, as I said, glorified, because I couldn't come to terms with what had happened to me yet. And so that was actually the first piece of writing I ever did, which it is part of it is included in the book. It's not that obvious, and I don't say what I just said about it, but it is in there. But after that, it was when I was in university. And so I went into university for psychology, and very quickly learned that as much as I still love psychology and took a lot of those courses, I decided to get an undergrad, apply to the School of Social Work and get an undergrad in that. Every assignment that we were given and all these case studies we were reading about that we had to kind of unpack and assess and treat, I thought, well, I want to make this meaningful. What if I externalize these parts of myself that at the time I still felt a lot of shame about and a lot of confusion and a whole bunch of different feelings? What if I externalize them, take them away from myself, and use them as case study kind of standardized clients? So that's what I did. If I had any opportunity for both of my undergraduate degrees, my minor, and eventually my graduate degree, any opportunity I had, I would make every assignment and make it about myself and my own experience. But to be fair, without anyone necessarily knowing that it was me, because I wasn't using my name.
Right. Wow.
Yeah, so the first person that I technically disclosed to without them really knowing was one of my professors, Sandra Preston. She actually, now we've come full circle. So the first person that I technically disclosed to, technically I say because I didn't say, this is me, was a university professor, Dr. Preston. She had this class that we were doing. I think it was activism. Purchased a book as part of our courseware. And I read the book and the story was fascinating. And I felt like, oh my gosh, this is like me. This is like, I have a story. I could write this. And honestly, I thought I could probably maybe write it a little bit better too. Just, I didn't think that the writing was that great. And I thought, if they're asking hundreds of university students to buy this book and read it, I feel like I could be helpful. So that was the first idea that I had, that maybe I could turn these little snippets that I was writing about my experience, these kind of short stories that I was turning into case studies to therapize myself through my education. I thought, one day I'm going to put them all together and make a book. And that's exactly what I did. It took me a long time, but that's what I did. Dr. Sandra Preston, I reached out to her a few months ago now, or maybe more than a few months. And I asked her, I'm sure you don't remember me, but she's like, of course I remember you. And I said, well, I've written this book, and it really kind of all started with your class and you. And would you consider reading it and maybe writing my foreword for the book? And I thought she would say no, but she said absolutely. And so the foreword of my book is technically the first person I disclosed to about 20 plus years ago.
And she wrote a wonderful foreword, by the way. I'll tell my audience that if you do pick up this book, make sure you read Dr. Sandra's foreword, because it's really good. Bibi, are you in a place where you could talk to us about your sexual assault and domestic violence type experiences? And if so, what are you able to tell us about your experience?
See, that's a perfect example of what you do and how you say it that makes the person just feel so safe. So thank you, Dave. Yes, I am. I would say that unfortunately, and I know I'm not alone in this, I think I worded it to you that I can talk everything from what I call like soft core sexual assaults all the way up to one's by friends, one by partner offering it in exchange for something for himself, which is really unfortunate. But I think it really took me the whole process of obviously my education and my work as well, but of writing this book to really call what I've been through what it is. And in the beginning part of my book, as maybe you've gotten to that part, when I talk about all the things that happened leading up to when I met my abusive ex, there was about 3 years there where it was the perfect storm. And I was literally being set up for the perfect predator to find me and groom me. And that really started with a lot of things, but for your podcast, we're talking about sexual assaults, and it really started with a handful of varying degrees or types, I guess you would say, of that, from high school boys who would, like the first one was a high school boy who I thought we were holding hands in class. And the next thing I knew, my hand was on something warm under the desk, and it was his penis was out and my hand was on it. And he was doing it on purpose to get the attention of the other boys, his friends. Then I was a social pariah at school and I was called the slut. And I had just moved. I had grown up in the city and my parents had moved us all to the country. And so I already didn't have friendships and connections. And then these things start to happen. And the next was a boy who I was a little bit older, who we were left alone at his house without his parents' supervision that I was not expecting. In fact, my mother made sure that she spoke to his mother in front of both of us and said, they're going to be supervised the whole time, right? And this boy's mom said, oh, absolutely. And as soon as my mom left, she was like, go do your thing. And I found myself alone in the basement where his bedroom was, where he just said, give me a blowjob. And as if that wasn't bad enough, I didn't even know what that was. I was 16, but maybe not even quite around 16. And I didn't even know what that meant. I only knew what it was called. And so that's quite literally what I did. So on top of him sharing that information and telling everybody at school what had happened, he also made fun of me to say that I quite literally blew on him because I didn't even know. Like I was quite sheltered at that age, I think, especially now that I work with kids, I'm like, oh, I was pretty sheltered. And so I had some other experiences like this, similar type experiences, because I was just craving love and connection and a sense of belonging. And like I said, I had just moved. I didn't have my friends. I was being bullied for the first time in my life. I'd never been bullied at my old school. My parents were going through something that I know about now, but I didn't know what it was when I was a kid. And so they were just not available. They were checked out. They were dealing with their own stuff. And in fairness to them, I didn't come to them and say, hey, this is all the stuff that's happening to me. I just got moody and I isolated myself and I shut them out. And so that all kind of happened. And then eventually I met this, thought he was my knight in shining armor. I was 17. He was 31. I didn't know that when I first met him, but honestly, even if that was the first thing he led with, it wouldn't have fazed me. I thought I was mature for my age. I had already previously lived on my own for a year when I was 16 with a 23-year-old. So the kids I was kind of starting to hang out with because I didn't have a connection in high school. So the kids I was hanging out with were kids who had already graduated high school, or lots of them had never finished high school, and they were significantly older than me. And so I kind of thought he was probably around my old roommate's age, like 23. I had no idea. And by the time I found out, it didn't matter. And so I started a relationship with him, which of course at first it felt like, oh my gosh, I can't do any wrong. He put me up on a pedestal. He totally love bombed me. I mean, we didn't even know what that word was or that phrase was all those years ago. And I just thought, oh, this guy gets me. He gets me. And he had this way, because I was so upset with my parents for feeling like my marks were never good enough, or I didn't have good enough friends, or like all the things, or I smoked at the time and how disgusting that was, or my parents, I got a tattoo and they didn't like that. And he had this perfect way of flipping that on everything to go against my parents. And so I was, yeah, he gets me. But that pretty quickly turned. One of the first really bad thing that happened was he was away for, I don't remember, a period of time, a couple days. He was going to go away and everybody knew that. But also he owed drug money. And so these people were coming to the house and I knew that, but he was going to be away and they were still coming and he knew they were coming and they knew he was gone. And I wasn't really clear on why they were coming to our house. And anyway, that turned into me being raped at gunpoint. outside under a bridge in the middle of the winter. That's all I knew at the time. And I was shocked. I was scared. I was confused. I didn't know who to tell. I didn't know what to do. It was the first time that I tried to get some help. I wrote an assignment to a teacher that I thought would raise some red flags, and it did. But by the time she approached me, I had decided it wasn't safe to tell her. And so I told him instead, him being my partner at the time, my 31-year-old boyfriend when I was 17. And when I told him, we were driving to friends' houses, and it came out when it did because we were driving right past where it had happened. And I kind of just spit it out. And I said, the name of this person raped me. And I started crying and lost it. And he didn't even turn his head to look at me. He was driving. He just said, I don't hate you. And I remember being like, what does that mean? And then he said something along the lines of, fix your face so that no one else will know what you've done. And in the moment, I was confused. I didn't know what to think, but what I decided, how I made sense of it, and my 17-year-old, up until now, pretty sheltered brain, I made sense of it by thinking, oh, this is what adults do. Adults pull it together, they move on, they dry their tears, wipe their eyes, they continue on with life, and they don't let it get them down. That's what adults do. And if I wasn't this young, dumb teenager, I would know that. And that's how a big part of our relationship over the next 2 years went, was that he would use my age against me, which was quite interesting when you think about it. And he was the one doing something criminal with my age, but he would use my age against me. It was that I was too young to understand. If only I could grow up, if only I would mature quicker, if only I'd known better.
Yeah, very interesting grooming technique. It's not unheard of, but it's not common. I think it's interesting that you had the courage to bring that up, because I know there are people in my audience who've experienced that type of manipulation and degradation. It's exactly what it is. And like you said, it's using an aspect of who you are, age, personality, knowledge, sophistication against you. I just want to interject here. I know I've interrupted your story, but
no, that's okay.
This is important for me, because I think it's important that you know where I'm coming from. And that is, Bibi, I am so sorry for the experience that you had that even brings you here to this show in this way. What a horrific experience you've had. And I'm talking cumulatively. And I just want you to know that I empathize with you, and I'm so, so sorry for you.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that. It's interesting because one of the things I find myself still, the internalized him that's still in me, is that I find myself still going back and forth between saying I was a child and it was a crime. I'm not talking the domestic violence. I'm strictly talking about our age. It was a crime. I was a child. But then I'll flip and defend myself, but really it's him in my head saying, but I was mature for my age when I had already lived on my own for a little bit. And so it's still that internalized bit of him in there. And I go back and forth, and it's frustrating, to be honest, that it's been over 2 decades and I still am doing that. But
it's so typical and normal that our brains do that. It's a neurobiological reaction, that what you are going through, how you relive this, how these past explicit memories keep recurring with intrusive memories and flashbulb memories and nightmares, and those types of experiences are so part of what it means to be traumatized in this way. And it's the worst possible thing that a human being can experience is rape and sexual assault. It goes beyond anything else on the chart of what it is that we can feel emotionally and how damaging and intrusive it is. I am so thankful that you have the fortitude and strength to talk about this, and I don't want to interrupt. So if there's something more that you'd like to share with us, we would love to have that opportunity.
Thank you. And I think just one other thing he used against me all the time was this. He caused a huge rift between my family and me. So he would use that against me all the time. Like, your family doesn't even love you. Your family doesn't even want you. Using what I had said to him about what were really only feelings of mine. Not that my parents ever said that, of course.
Right.
Well, I shouldn't say of course, but they didn't. So he would use that too against me. But I think coming away from my domestic violence story and my book for a minute, but to stick on with sexual assaults, these were not the last times either. And one of the things that I struggle with to this day the most, and I'm assuming other survivors do too, but I haven't noticed anyone talking about this. And I've listened to your podcast and lots of others, and I've told you about my book Instagram, and I haven't really heard anyone mention this, but I really felt like, from what I'd been through when I was younger, that I would do it different the next time. If there had to be a next time, that I would scream, or I would say no, or I would whatever the situation. And unfortunately, I've had not a whole handful, but a few more experiences in my life. One when I was 25 by a friend. One, how long ago would that have been? Well, my husband and I have been together 9 years, and it happened toward the beginning of our relationship, maybe a couple years in, so maybe 7 years ago. And then one even just a couple years ago. The one at 25 was a full-blown, although gentle, if that makes sense, sexual assault by a friend. I kept saying no and crying, but it was a friend, and he just gently persisted. That really messed me up, because I thought, oh my gosh, I know this person and we have mutual friends, and his girlfriend is my friend. I could have hit him maybe, or done something else, but I just froze. I just froze and cried. And I guess I didn't fully freeze because I said no, but I just kind of, I know that I shouldn't say this when I'm going to tell you how I was feeling. I felt like I just let it happen, which of course I didn't, but
right.
And then with that one, I thought, well, I'll learn the lesson, because he ended up he got ahead of it, and he used the narrative. He flipped it to work for himself. So he actually told his girlfriend, who was my friend, that we had slept together. And that is not what happened. And so she got upset with me about it and called me out. And I just completely got rid of that whole part of my life. It was from the same small town where I'd met my domestic violence ex, and I was already gone. I was already in university, many cities away. And I just thought, you know what, I can't know anybody from this town anymore at all. But then thinking, okay, well, now I've had it a variety of ways, right? Some boys that I liked in high school who took advantage and pushed it too far. A boyfriend who, I'm all over the place. I didn't finish that part of the story. The rape that happened, that he said he wasn't mad at me, and to tidy up my face so that nobody else could find out what I'd done. He ended up telling me, when he was relocating me to the opposite side of our country to get me away from everybody we knew, he ended up telling me that he had set that up. He had owed a pretty substantial drug debt, and he made a deal with the leader of this gang that he could have me in exchange for the drug debt being wiped. So he told him, when he wasn't going to be home, he told him that he had told me that he would be coming, even though I didn't know for why. And he told him that he could do what he wanted as long as he didn't owe the money anymore. Forgot about that. I forgot I didn't tell you the end of that part. So all of these horrific experiences, I really thought, okay, now I'm more of an adult. I'm in my 30s, right? I would do it differently. I would stand up for myself. I would say no. I would shout and scream. I would go to the police. I would press charges. I would do all these things. If it ever happened to me now, I would make different choices. And I just have to be really honest that has not been my experience. And my experience has been that I freeze every damn time. I am terrified to ever be in a situation where I feel uncomfortable, because I will freeze. I have had to have so many conversations with my husband over the 9 years and a bit that we've been together, to say, if I'm telling you I'm not feeling safe, or if we're in a space and this is happening, or it'll be after the fact, right? When this happened a couple minutes ago, I need you to be there, stand up, help me, because I literally cannot speak for myself. I totally just shut down.
BB, do you know what that is? I'm guessing because of your education, you probably have some insight as to what your body is doing, what your brain is doing, and why that shutdown occurs. Are you able to address that for us?
Yeah, it's a survival tactic. You either fight, you flight, you freeze, or you fawn. And fawn is a newer one that's been added in the last couple of years. I really appreciate that because that's 100% little me and still parts of me now for sure. But that freezing, it's to survive. Yeah. It's what you have to do to survive. And so as much as I appreciate what my body's trying to do for me, I just want to share how frustrating it is. No matter
you are more than welcome to say that.
I swear how fucking frustrating that is. For all the work that you do and for all of the healing and for all of the education and for all of the, no matter what, like, it's just so frustrating to think that you just still might freeze.
Yeah.
That you just.
Well, scientifically and neurobiologically, that's called tonic immobility. And it happens to varying degrees depending upon the person and depending upon that person's experience and also on what our emotional neural paths have taught us. So even though we can resolve to not react a certain way, that doesn't mean that we will not react that way, as you've already brought up. And in fact, the chances that you will just revert back to whatever you did the very first time you froze, it's going to repeat and repeat. And the reason that happens, if you don't mind me kind of giving an explanation for this, is that our brain's programming, the number one purpose of the brain is to keep us alive and to keep us safe. If when we are initially impacted the way rape and sexual assault impacts us as human beings, if our response was to freeze and we live through that rape, because that's what our brain is trying to do, what that encodes and embeds in our memory system is, if that's what worked before, do it again, do it again, do it again, and over and over. And yes, it's amazing that you brought that up because you're right. We don't talk about that enough on this show. It's part of what I teach and understand and have researched and looked into and read a lot about, but not a whole lot of people bring that up. But you're absolutely right. It's that repetitive response that we as mammals go through because of the way our brains are wired and what we are programmed to do. It makes perfect sense.
I think part of it for me too, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. I had another situation happen since I've been with my husband too, that I had to think about a lot because I was like, I was going to Chicago for some clinical training by myself. There were people at the door saying, do you need an Uber driver? Do you need an Uber driver? And they're not even supposed to be right there. So the whole airport tells you, do not get in with one of these people. They are not authorized to be picking people up. Well, this guy kind of grabbed me and he said, come on, I've got an Uber for you. And I was terrified. So I was frozen in a way, but not fully. I felt like I was in danger. I didn't want to go with him. But I struggle with standing up to people. If it's for someone else, Dave, if it was you or my sister or my best friend, I have no problem standing up for somebody else. But when it comes to me, I have a very hard time finding my voice.
Absolutely.
I went with this person while I got out my phone. He was walking ahead of me with my luggage and taking pictures of the back of him, pictures of where I was in the airport, picture eventually of his license plate. Finally, I start texting my husband. I said, here are these pictures. If you don't hear from me, here's the license plate. And my husband's like, get out, don't get in the car or get out of the car. Or what are you doing? Tell him you don't need a ride. I couldn't do that. I could do more than I've been able to do in the past, but I couldn't find my voice. And I thought a lot about that. And it was handy that I was going to clinical training because I just volunteered to be one of the therapists that got a session done for the rest of the class to watch. I had to do a lot of thinking around that. And it really comes down to this experience that I had with my ephebophile partner when I was a teenager, where anytime I did, because when he first met me, I was feisty, I was sassy, I was full of spit and vinegar. But I very quickly learned to not be like that. And so even when I'm aware that I'm in danger and I'm not frozen to the point of being totally immobile, I was able to follow this man and take pictures and tell my husband, but I couldn't speak up and stand up to him because I was so afraid of what could happen if I did that. More afraid of what could happen if I didn't do as he wanted than what could happen wherever he was taking me. And it obviously turned out okay, and nothing came of it aside from he totally ripped me off with how much he charged me. But I was shot. My nerves were shot for the rest of the whole week that I was there for clinical training.
That makes perfect sense. And that leads into what my next question was going to be. We've talked about the experiences themselves, and you've alluded somewhat the impact, especially with how it impacted you with your family. But those types of experiences, going back to the very first time and then those subsequent ones, impact us in cumulative ways. Are you able to talk to us about how the impact affected your daily life?
Oh, I mean, yeah, but where would I even start?
Start.
I mean,
Yeah.
I know I'm just like, I could take this in so many different directions. Like I think first and foremost impacted my self-esteem and self-confidence, but also just in trusting myself or trusting my body or trusting my gut instincts. But it impacts me to this day. And that's part of what I really tried to get across in my book about even 20 years later, 20 plus years later, I'm still impacted by a certain type of car, by a certain type of cologne, by his first name, which I don't name him in the book at all. He doesn't deserve a name. I was sharing with somebody recently that I have a really good friend here in the city where I live now, and she started dating this new guy a year ago, and he looks exactly like what I think my ex would look like now. I mean, the same eyes, which you're reading my book, you see how many times I bring up the eyes, the same eyes, the same face, the same approximate height. I mean, I'm adding age onto him because I haven't seen him in so long. He has the same profession. And I, in my book, write about how I truly cannot, it took many times in the last year of me having to force myself to stay in a space with this individual, to try to talk myself through it, do a little bit of CBT on myself, leave when I have to leave. But the visceral response that I have to this person, and my body and my mind trying so hard to convince me this is him, this is your ex. And I know it's not. First of all, they're not even from the same continent, much less city. This one has an accent. They're not the same, but there are so many similarities. Even like I said, their occupation, that they have a brother that does the same occupation, you name it. And I struggle. And that's 20 plus years later that
Absolutely.
I could barely be around my friends for the last year because of this.
So those certain aspects, especially the things that you mentioned, the sensory impact, the way he looks, the way he smells, the way he acts, all of those sensory impacts are activating. Some people use the word triggering. Those are activating the synapse of those past experiences. And where do those go? Right into the same ruts, those neural paths that have existed and impacted your life to keep you safe, that have been there for decades. It makes perfect sense. I'm appreciative of the fact that you were willing to talk about that, because it is something that I think those who are listening who've experienced as a victim or survivor those same type feelings and thoughts and impacts and reactions need to hear they're not alone. It's a common neurobiological brain response. And I want to point out too that what our brain does and what our mind, our thoughts do, those are two different things. Your brain is an organ and it has certain programs and functions that it's going to do because it's a brain. And where our mind takes us is correlated and a reactionary response to what the brain is doing. And even though we want it to feel different, those become embedded and impacted in the same ways over and over again also. And that's why we feel like we get stuck. I think you talk about that a little bit in some of the notes that we've talked about, is that feeling of being stuck. You've already mentioned that too, that you still freeze whenever you feel any sense of endangerment. And I think that's an important aspect of everything that you're talking about. It's also interesting how you've managed to control it to the point where you actually can write about it. And you wrote this amazing book. Help us understand how that process worked and what you did to say, yes, this needs to be written about, even though it may be difficult to remember and think about and write.
It was university that I first started deciding that I was going to use it in that way, but I found it to be so healing right off the bat. technically I was submitting it to somebody, but the people I was submitting it to didn't know for sure that it was me. Now, that being said, nobody also asked. I think that in 2025, I would hope that if I was handing in those same assignments, and also I would hope that the courses that I would be reading about these things in would have content and trigger warnings in them. But so it started off being for that, but I just realized that it was so healing just to get it out. And that the more that I rewrote the same scene, so I started off with the first scene, which was actually me being raped at gunpoint. I've probably rewritten and reread that scene. I couldn't even tell you how many times over the decades. And then I would move on to another scene, and I kind of picked like my top, I don't know, I'd have to count them, maybe 10 things. And I just found it to be every time I would write something, it would lessen how I felt about it. And then I would read it. It was hard to read, and then it would be a bit easier. Then I would write it again. And I just found it to be so therapeutic for me, even though I wasn't doing anything with it or showing it to anybody. And so that's when I realized, like, there was a point in time when I thought, like, well, all of my major domestic violence experiences or sexual assault experiences have been written out. I feel better. I can talk about them without breaking down or crying or freezing or whatever else. And so I'm good to go. And then I thought, well, no, it can't just stop there. What more can I do with it? And so decided that I wanted to weave it all together into a story, but that I wanted the story to kind of reflect the different stages of life, you know, like while you're in the thick of it, and then a decade out, and then another decade out, to show that it never truly goes away. I mean, not for me anyway, and not for many of the women and men that I've heard or have spoken to either. It just changes.
It does. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's interesting too that you talk about that therapeutic, and that writing over and over again helps process that in your brain, and how your brain responds differently every single time you write it out, because it's not going to be written the same way twice, right? It evolved. And I think that's the cathartic impact of writing, is that change and that realization and that processing. It's interesting to hear you talk about that.
So one of the things that I did, it's not in what you're reading, because my editor did not like this for many reasons. Don't even get me started on my editor, but the book originally was Katie sharing her stories, and then Katie's therapist writing back to her. And then at the end, you would find out that they were actually the same person. It was just Katie experiencing it and writing it down. And then technically we're playing with time, and it would have been years, decades, whatever later, that the same person was looking at the journals or diary entries or whatever you want to say, and responding in a way that Katie needed at that time and that she didn't have. And so that's how it started. And I still think that that's a genius idea.
I do too. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I thought so too, but my editor did not think so, and told me all the reasons that wouldn't work and it wouldn't make sense, and you can't play with time, and they can't be the same person. And I just got to the point where I was feeling deflated, and I just wanted to, after so many years working on this book, I just needed it to be done. I needed it to stop taking up so much of my life and so much of my time and of my husband's time. And he wasn't even around, you know, during that time period of my life. And I just needed it to be done. And so I thought, well, I found a different, what I still think is a, maybe not as clever, but still a bit of a clever way to kind of play with that. And but yeah, initially it was Katie writing to, you don't know who, you think it's this therapist of hers, but it's actually, they're decades apart.
And Katie is her own therapist.
And Katie is her own therapist. She's who she needed.
Yeah.
And didn't have.
Isn't that reality?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So insightful, so impactful. I love that. I'll be your editor and we can rewrite.
Right? Yeah. Let me tell you, that's a whole other podcast topic for who knows when and who knows with who, but the experience that I had in writing this, and there's so many things I wish I knew when I started, that I would have done things differently. But one of the things that does more relate to what we're talking about is how re-traumatizing a lot of it was. So for example, with that editor, she just clearly did not get trauma, period. Like, clearly has had a pretty privileged life in that sense to not get it at all, like didn't get it. And so I just had to be able to realize that it wasn't personal. It wasn't about me. It was a her thing. And I needed to just work past it. But earlier on in my writing process, when I actually was started to write the book, which was still a long time ago, I think I was like 28 or so, I joined a critiquing group. And so there are a bunch of us who are writing books, and we would take turns submitting chunks like 30 pages or whatever and critiquing each other's work.
Right.
And the first time that I did it, I can't remember the order, but one of the times that I did it, they knew that it was about my life. And then another time they did not know that it was about my life. And I got very different feedback. So I'm glad I did it both ways. But one of the things that has been really difficult and re-traumatizing for me in writing is that people's opinions and people's, like, they just, if you don't get it, you really don't get it. It's really, I had two men in one of my critiquing classes, and they just said, we can't stand Katie. Like, we don't feel sorry for her. Why doesn't she just leave? Why would she be with this piece of shit? And it's like, well, are you reading the rest of it? But it was good feedback, because I was like, okay, well, I guess I need to make it a little bit more clear on how this came to be, what got her to that point, what stopped her from being able to leave. One comment that was made to me, which actually made me put my book on hold for about a decade, maybe not quite, but pretty close. But it was good feedback, it was a man, and he said, you have to make us fall in love with him, the abuser, at the same time that Katie falls in love with him. Because if you don't, then we don't understand how Katie got there. And I think that was, he didn't say it as gracefully as that, but that's what I took it to mean. And I thought, I think that's really great feedback. And I am not ready to write him in any positive light. Yeah. I didn't even know how I would do that. I honestly struggled to think of anything that wasn't superficial. Like, he was super good looking and he was super charismatic and everybody else liked him and he had a car and he was of age to buy cigarettes. Like, I can't think of anything deeper than those things, right? And I didn't want to invent something. I didn't want to give him any sort of credit for being a good human being at any point. And so I really struggled with, how can I get the reader to understand why Katie was drawn to him in the first place? How do I do that? And so I put it on the shelf for a long time, like almost a decade.
I totally get that. That is a rough road to hoe in terms of getting that intimate with that character for others to understand, but also to put your emotions, your feelings, your everything I've talked about before, your experiences, your sophistication level, your education level, everything that made you who you are. That's who fell in love with him, not someone else who is going to be able to relate because they don't have the same experiences and sophistication level and education and views and emotional needs. I mean, that's what you're talking about, right? Yeah. What you fell in love with was something that was as superficial as you're saying, but also as deep as something that there's almost no way to articulate because of all those personality parts that make us who we are, that make us fall in love with someone. Wow, Bibi, that is so intriguing and so insightful. I have to ask then, how is talking about this right now in this space, in this time, impacting you as you think back on that whole process, the mindset that you were in, and getting to the point where you had to shelf that book for almost a decade? What kind of impact does that have on you here and now?
I actually think it just makes me feel that much more proud that I finally got my poop in a group and got it done. So good. That I found a way that I felt good about, that I thought I could do, and that I got back to it and got it done.
I think that speaks to your fortitude, and some people call that resilience, right? That's a part of human experience, is resilience or not, right? I think you are on an amazing path. I think the healing journey that you've come through and are continuing on, like you said, it's a journey. And I've mentioned this a million times too on this show. It's not an event, it's an experience. And you have articulated that in so many amazing ways.
Thank you.
How will you, when we're done with this conversation, take care of yourself now with this here and now stuff? What do you do when those explicit memories, which are memories you know you have, actually activate implicit memories, which are memories you didn't know you have until talking about the explicit memory activates those, and they come to the forefront of your brain and make you think about things that maybe you hadn't anticipated. Mm-hmm. And that can last the rest of today. It may mm-hmm. last into tomorrow and the week and the month. In fact, I've had experiences where somebody contacted me like 4 months later and said, this just popped into my head as mm-hmm. a result of our interview 4 months ago. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How will you deal with all of those, BB?
Well, I'm glad you asked this actually, because this is something that I wanted to touch on and I would have forgotten otherwise, but it's really important to be as prepared as you can be and to know exactly everything you just described, what could come up, how long it could last. You might not even be able to put your finger on the funk that you're in or whatever else. And so for me, part of it was taking my time, which is why you reached out to me in October and now it's February tomorrow and here we are, taking your time and making sure that you're prepared. And so one thing that I have done is I have been very intentional when I'm going to be talking to other people. Writing a book is one thing. I did that by myself with nobody else around me. I mean, and the only people who read it were my editors. Talking about it for the first time ever, which I've been doing in the last couple of weeks, is quite different. And so I prepared myself by making sure that I've always been in therapy for, to be honest, not about my domestic violence. That happened so long ago, and I don't feel that I need to waste any more time or money on it. I feel like I'm good enough for that. But to talk about things that come up now. And so for me, it's talking about the anxiety that I have about speaking about it. And I've done some EMDR work with my therapist on like why I feel like I'm not enough and why I have this perfectionistic tendency. Like you had talked on our phone call, and I hope you're okay with me sharing this, Absolutely. That I had sent with you this whole big long, like, here are all the things I could speak in depth to, and which do you want to pick? And that's me trying to be prepared to have some sort of sense of control of it. And so I've been working with my therapist on that and like just being myself and just showing up and just letting whatever happens happen, but also to follow up with support too. And so before meeting with you today, I met with her 2 days ago, and I will be meeting with her again. Well, I've already talked to her. I can text her, but I will also be following up with her after this to let her know how it goes and then to follow up next week. And so just being really careful, and I might not need it. The last time we did this, I was speaking with some people from No More, the global organization for domestic and sexual violence. Mm-hmm. And I was so anxious. I was beside myself. So we did some EMDR and she said, I want you to follow up with me right after you meet with them. And I met with them. It was amazing. It was amazing. I came out of it feeling elated and so proud and excited. And they asked me to be a speaker come April. So I'll be on speaking for them. I followed up with her and I said exactly what I just said here. Like, it was great. It was wonderful. And I'm excited. And they booked me for April. And she said, yeah, see, I knew. I honestly think that would have gone very different if we hadn't had the EMDR session to work on what was holding me back and what my fears were and where I was stuck. And it was nice to be able to follow up with her. And so that's what her and I have been doing as I prepare for these things. Or one time I even met with her before I knew I was getting feedback from my editor, because my editor, she's brilliant and she's so skilled in her very specific niche, but it was hard reading a lot of her feedback because she wasn't a very sensitive or trauma-informed at all, but not even a sensitive person. And I would get support before, and then after I would get feedback from her or get my book back. And so that's what I will be doing. I had a session just before meeting with you. I will follow up with my therapist after to say that it went amazing, because I feel like it did and I'm feeling fine. And if something comes up over the weekend, I have such a phenomenal support system. I cannot even tell you. I have grown them and fed, not them, but you know what I mean, the relationships and maintained them. I have such a wonderful group of people that I can lean on. I have a husband who is, I'm telling you, I didn't even know how to dream big enough for him. I just didn't. And he's been so amazing through all of this, and patient and supportive, but also quiet and there, but over there, not getting up too much in my business. And so I've got him. I'm really just at a place in this journey now with my book having been released early. Amazon broke rules and my book was not supposed to be out until February 12th, but they released it on January, I think 10th or something. So now I'm just excited, and I'm basking in the pride that I have for myself on what I believe very firmly is the biggest accomplishment of my life, because this was not easy and it was not quick.
Wow, baby. I love that. Thank you for sharing all of that. What insight that is, and how powerful that is to hear that you are able to take care of yourself in the ways that you are, and that you have those resources. Not only the therapist, I think that's amazing and good. Some people can't afford a therapist though. And the fact that you referred to and talked about a support system, a support group, that can be, as you just mentioned, friends, family, a husband that really understands, and hopefully that continues. I think that is such an important aspect of getting through this. Yeah.
Or Dave, what I brought up at the very beginning, which I found to be more helpful than probably everything I've experienced in my life, which was my book's Instagram account. I have felt more supported, more understood, more helpful, because sometimes you're on the receiving end, sometimes you're on the giving end. The networking that I have done just since June, I cannot tell you how much that has changed my life. That has been the biggest thing of all of these years, decades of everything. That has been the biggest. And I'm just thinking, why didn't I do something like that earlier?
Yeah.
And I think why is because I'm the type of person, I'm an all or nothing. But it doesn't have to be that. It can be both. And so I have my personal social media accounts where I keep it lighthearted and fun and positive and whatever, my real life. And it's both my real life, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And then I have an account where it is fully about supporting survivors and being real and authentic and being around people who really just get it.
Yeah.
And so that's where I would say that the biggest support has come from in my whole life.
Yeah.
Is that.
And that's free. Anybody could do that, right?
Anybody can do that. Yeah.
Or they can just join with whatever you've got going right now. They can find you on your Instagram account.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
Absolutely. The networking that I've done with it started off for me where I would see other people who have accounts, but they wrote books and I'd buy them all. So I can't tell you. I mean, if you've written a book, you should definitely follow me because I'll probably buy your book like this. I actually just had 2 more arrive today. I'm a big, big fan of supporting survivors who have done the writing work only because I have too.
Right.
And so I know what that takes, but also just networking with people like you or a couple of other podcast people who've reached out to me. There are some people that I've been supporting and there have been some people supporting me in different ways. Like it's just, I can't say enough positive things about the community that is online if you look for it.
I love that. I also get the sense that that's a huge part of that coping mechanism and response to activators, that Instagram account. And can you give that Instagram account name?
Yeah, so it's long. I should have thought through this better. So it's my book's title and then the author name. So it's ordinary love _BB Gabriel.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's out there, but I'll get that in the episode notes too, so people can just actually click on it.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll link that to that Instagram page. But where I was going with this is it sounds to me that you were alluding to some routine stuff that you do, not only the routine of contacting your therapist and having that EMDR available if needed right next session. Mm-hmm. Are there things that you do in addition to that, like taking walks, listening to music? And are you able to share some of those kind of routine type situations that you find yourself doing when you are activated?
Mm-hmm. Lots of things. Music is a huge thing for me, and I use it in a variety of different ways. Sometimes I will use music to intentionally put me into a certain state so that I can time myself and give myself 2 song lengths worth or 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever it is to allow myself to feel those feelings, let it out, do whatever I need to do. And then when the time is up or the song or songs are over, then I get back to my life. And that's a way that I have controlled when I feel feelings. If you give yourself time every so often, then I have found personally that I don't get surprised as often of it sneaking up out of nowhere. So that's one thing that I've done, but just music in general, singing. I love singing. Tonight, I'm going to karaoke. It's my favorite thing to do. And no, I'm not good at it, but I'm not tone deaf. So, so that's a big thing if I'm feeling really stressed or anything. So that's a big thing. I love animals. So spending any time with any animal, whether they're mine or not, or even looking at animal memes or pictures, or especially if I'm with mine, that's huge. You can't not feel loved when you're around an animal. You know what I mean? You don't feel lonely. You don't feel unlovable. Like they just have this special way without words. And yeah, walking, of course, I'm not today, but I live in one of the sunniest places in my country. I live in Canada and I live in one of the sunniest spots. And again, not today, but typically we've got some really great weather. So just being outside or looking outside. And then I've got my support system that I mentioned. I know who to check on when I need different things. I know who to check on if I need a pick me up. I know who to check on if I just need to vent. I know who to contact if whatever it may be. And I think that's really important too. You know, when people say read a room, like you have to read your supports too.
Yeah.
What do you need? And of all of your supports, who do you think is best equipped or willing to give that to you? Just kind of rambling now. Did I answer your question?
Absolutely. And I'm so thankful that you did answer the question and in the way that you did too. And again, I'm going to go back to something I said before. It's important to hear that. And I'm so thankful that you were so willing to share all of that, because there are going to be connections in the audience of somebody who says, yes, I relate to that. Oh yeah, I get that. Oh, I do that too. I love that she does that. And that's the whole point of me asking, is so that the audience has a connection point with you, has a community, has a sense of belonging. As you said, you feel when you listen to these episodes, it's critical.
Totally. It's so funny because, I mean, you've been doing this a long time and podcasts are fairly new to me, although I do like audiobooks, but that's different. It just feels like you're in there with the people that are talking. Like it just feels like you're part of the family or part of the friend group or part of the conversation, even though you're just listening. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it.
Yeah. And it's a fuel system for me, and I love doing it. And I get into it too. Even though we've been in touch with each other since October, I feel so much closer to you after this. What have we been talking? I haven't even looked.
Yeah, like a while, an hour and
a little over an hour and 20 minutes. And I love it. I cannot thank you enough. Bibi, this has been an amazing opportunity and an amazing time to share and be with you. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much.
I say this to almost all my guests. I'll say it to you. I would love to do it again. And yes, even some of the things that you think might not be relatable to sexual assault survivor stories absolutely are. I don't think there's any topic that we couldn't talk about that would somehow relate to trauma and trauma-informed education and what it means to get through things. Whether it's rape, sex assault, domestic violence, any type of interpersonal violence at all, or any other type of trauma. I'm very anxious to look at some of the paths we can go down together in the future on future episodes.
Well, we're going to do a medical trauma one, but today wasn't a good day since I'm still in the thick of it. But
oh my word.
I promised you that one.
And it's such an important one that so many of my listeners are going to be able to relate to. Because it gets brought up all the time.
I just honestly, I know we're wrapping up here and we will get to this one day, but I cannot believe that we're in the year 2025 for a lot of things. I don't think we've come very far in my lifespan. However, when it comes to medical re-traumatization, it blows my mind that we are in 2025. I am shocked every time, not every time, but almost every time. And as you know, I'm going through my own medical crises right now, and we will talk about it again, but we need to do some work there. And I know you are doing some work there. You're training.
It's amazing that you've said it the way you said it, because reaching out to hospitals, medical clinics, doctors, nurses associations, you name it, it is one of the most difficult barriers to break through in terms of saying, I have this training on what it means to be trauma informed and how to treat patients, and not only patients, but coworkers and supervisors and all of what you're going through. Let's have a training session. And they're like, no, we're good. We get it. We know what we're doing. It's mind boggling. It's shocking.
Yeah, it's shocking. Yeah, it is shocking.
And here it is, 2025.
And if you want to come to Canada, I will do everything in my power to get you in where I know here because it's needed. So I appreciate that you're doing that work too, not just this podcast, you're doing that too. You're doing so much and I'm so grateful, and thank you for everything you do.
Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. Bibi, I'm looking forward to staying in touch with you, keeping up with where we're going in the future with episodes, because I know it's going to happen. And I know my audience is going to want to hear from you again. So thank you.
Thank you.
This
Awesome.
has been,
Thank you too.
yeah, this has been amazing. Thanks, Bibi.
Bye. Bye.
That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. Thank you for being here. A special thanks to Bibi Gabriel for her courage in sharing her story of rape, sexual assault, and domestic violence. Bibi, your strength and resilience are an inspiration to others on their healing journey. To my listeners, don't forget to grab a copy of Bibi's book available on Amazon. You'll find the link in the show notes. Please share this episode and the book with your friends, family, and colleagues. Episodes like this help normalize the conversation and bring justice to victims and survivors. Another great way to do this is to start by believing, because we all know someone whose life has been impacted by rape or sexual assault. Please remember to subscribe and rate the show and spread the word that we're available wherever you listen to your podcasts. Also, remember to follow Sexual Assault Survivor Stories on Instagram. It helps others find us, which is another way to bring justice to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault. Be sure to join me next week for another powerful episode right here on Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. We'll see you next week.